I meet quite a lot of bankers along the way, and then sometimes they worry me because they seem to be a sort of moral-free zone. Do you think that the kind of regulation of the financial system can work through rules, or do you think we need some fundamental change in people's moral outlook or sense of doing the right thing?
I once had to interview Niall Ferguson, you know, the historian Niall Ferguson, and I mentioned the word greedy bankers to him, and he said to me, he said nothing's new, he said greed is to bankers as physical fitness is to footballers. He said, don't think they've got any worse, it's always been there. And I've reflected on that quite a lot about the idea that, I mean, I actually have quite a dark view of the human condition, so I'm not particularly condemning bankers. I think we're all bastards. I mean, that's my bottom line about things. I think actually that the places and the environments and the systems that you have can actually make certain sorts of behaviour possible. And though, I mean, I think one of the particular things about the battlefield is that people have to make instant moral decisions, and the rules really break down when people have to do that, the rule-based approach. But I think in the city, I think one of the things we've had is an absence of the right sort of regulation, and the belief that freedom... I think what we had in the second part of the 20th century morally is the idea that freedom is the most important virtue, and it became a sort of cuckoo virtue, pushed out all the other things. So we need to be completely free from everything. And in the city that meant deregulation under Mrs. Thatcher and Big Bang and all that sort of stuff. And I think that deregulation, that using freedom as a total trump card was a big mistake. And that actually we need to have the right sort of shaped environment for us to, especially something as dangerous and as important as the city. So I don't think it's just about good bankers, whatever that means. I mean, you know, what is the good banker? It doesn't have sex with his secretary and fiddle his expenses. I mean, or doesn't. I mean, I think actually we need to have good rules in the city, but I think we need to have a broader conception of the common good for which individuals and the rules aim.
Anybody else? Any question? Any other questions?
The greater majority of people who have become so accustomed to the appalling violence, so the woman hanging up her laundry, and in your case, to me, what was most, I don't do violence very well, but as you said, it looks quite plastic, the violence. It doesn't look half as real as it does in the movies. What frightened me was the normal people who were walking down the street as if nothing was happening. And is any of the work you do focused on getting those people, who are the majority, to rebel against what is absolutely not normal and is a horrific situation, or is more the focus on the minority, but the ones who are causing all the trouble?
The biggest part of public health and my work is about changing the norms. But can I tell you, that's why, in fact, I was quite delighted to come and speak to people who were from a creative background. How do you change the norms of a society, of people who are so used to it? I want them to be outraged. I'd actually suggested to a couple of my religious friends that when we had a murder, that we put a plaque outside saying, are you angry about this? You know, because we have these big shrines that are set up, normally with Celtic and Rangers jerseys, and we actually have a policy called shrine scene management, because they were so big and we had huge problems, getting rid of them. Changing the norms is probably the biggest challenge that we have. For people not to close their curtains in Kensington and Chelsea and just think that's those bad boys in Lewisham or Tower Hamlets. You need everybody to be involved. And so it's a constant challenge. I mean, I speak to anybody. I mean, I'll go up to Lewis and speak to 10 people. I'll go to prisons. I probably spoke to about 17,000 people last year, face to face, because I have to keep saying the same thing again and again and again. It's not right. And occasionally, there's a Rosa Parks moment. You know, the people that say, we've had enough. But in a way, we probably need creative people to say, how is it you change the behaviour? You know, I mean, I don't know what they call it, nudge or whatever it is now. But you have to make them angry. I want to make them angry. I want to make them angry because this should never happen.
I mean, I obviously agree with exactly all of that. I mean, my sense about it is just getting people to see what's around them. I mean, on my parish is Elephant and Castle, and the lower bit of the parish on the Walworth Road is where the riots happened, and it's a place that has gangs and all of this. And it's a place that underneath my house I can hear the Northern Lining. People, millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people go through the parish every day. They go on the roundabouts, they come through every day. And the interesting thing is nobody ever sees what it is. Now, I mean, it feels like that. It feels a metaphor for me, that there's so many people that are coming through that place and yet not seeing the people around them. So, you know, I mean, in a sense, in as much as your creative work is helping people to see things they don't see before, I think that that's absolutely vital. I mean, it's just, and part of it is being angry, part of it is having the hope to try and have the courage to change things and all of that. But the first thing is, you know, people, as, you know, Prospero says to Miranda in The Tempest, what seest thou else? And I think it's actually a fundamental moral question in your daily life. What else do you see? And just notice it.
One of the things I'd like to ask all of you is, certainly behind the scenes, you all seem like really reasonable, charming. Actually, I'm not sure that's true. You seem like reasonable, engaging people. But you know that, I think it's the George Bernard Shaw thing, progress depends on the unreasonable man or woman. I suppose my question would be how, particularly in a situation when when the odds are against you, how unreasonable do you have to be? I mean, John, is it unreasonable? I mean, I was struck by some of the things in your book where it didn't sound like you. I always thought you were perfectly reasonable, but there's quite a lot of stuff in there where you're, I think, being quite unreasonable. Is that important, do you think?
I think, I mean, certainly coming from the creative side, that you've got to be unreasonable. You've got to be fearless. And I always say to, you know, people, this is when I hear these words about, you know, we all work together and we'll have a brainstorm and all that crap.
You must like that. Oh, you must like that.
You know, nothing great ever came out of a brainstorm. Nothing, all right? Okay things came out, nothing great. So you want to go to a brainstorm and be okay, that's fine by me, all right?
Nobody put the hand up.
No. But I think that when if you're earning your living by being creative, you're trying to constantly come up with ideas that people haven't seen before. So when I'm presenting an idea, I'm putting it down in front of a group of people like this, and they all put the idea, and they all look at it and they go, oh, I haven't seen that before, John. That's very different. And at that moment, you then have to have a fearlessness about you, and you have to a certain extent to be unreasonable, because what's going to happen is nervousness is going to creep into that meeting. They're going to look at it all and say, that's going to be hard to sell. We don't know that. Is that right? And you can be worn down by it. And it's at that moment that you have to go, this is what I'm doing, and this is what we're going to do. And I think, you know, collaboration soon leads to consensus. It tipples into consensus very, very rapidly. And I think if you look at, but yet, you know, you look at businesses today and you hear the new jargon is collaboration, and we all work together and sing songs together and hold hands and happy clappy and all that rubbish. Nothing will ever come out of that is great. So you've got to be, and that's partly you are slightly unreasonable.
Giles, what about you in the church? Do you have to be unreasonable?
Definitely have to be unreasonable. I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, it's essential your preparedness to be unreasonable. If reasonable means that, you know, the position you come to is always triangulated from whoever's in the room, and if that's what you're doing, then I mean, it's just sort of wishy-washy nonsense. I mean, you have to believe in something. You have to stand something. You have to sort of talk out of your deepest convictions. And I mean, I think, you know, unless you do that, you might as well just be an empty seat. So you really do have to, so unreasonable is just like preparedness to offend people, the preparedness to vote the other way, the preparedness to be the one man amongst the rest of the world, all of that sort of stuff. And that's partly to do with knowing yourself and rehearsing where you come from and what you're about. But absolutely, I mean, reasonable is just a weasel word.
Michael, what about you? Were you unreasonable, or are you unreasonable?
Well, I would echo the other two, I think, very largely. I remember, for example, the government got itself into a position where we had created an enterprise zone out in Canary Wharf, and so all these buildings were going up, and there was no way of getting people to these buildings. There was no road and there was no railway leading to these buildings, which is a difficult position to be in. And, and I was the Minister of Transport, and I had rather a strong belief that we ought to build the Jubilee Line extension out to Canary Wharf. Otherwise, the whole thing was going to be a catastrophe. And I couldn't get other ministers to see this. You know, it was nobody else's problem. It was a problem shared and therefore, you know, nobody's problem. And I did have to behave very, very unreasonably. I was, you know, quite sharp with a number of colleagues. And I think, you know, this did not help my popularity. But we got the Jubilee Line done, and, you know, it's something I'm now very proud of. But it doesn't always have to be shouting, of course. Alex Ferguson was asked, I believe, you know, whether... No, sorry, someone was asked about Alex Ferguson, did they fear the hairdryer? And they said, no, we didn't fear the hairdryer, we feared the silence after a game, the silence of disappointment. And now I work in teams, you know, we make these programs called Great British Railway Journeys, and it's a fantastic experience. I work generally with 5 very young people who are wonderful. Different 5 people each time, but wonderful. But I do have very, very high standards, and they generally know that I'm not happy if I go quiet. And, you know, we all get back in the white van to drive to the next place, and I'm quiet, and they know, right, we need to do better next time. So yes, still unreasonable.
And Karyn, what about you? I mean, you famously said, or you've said in the stuff I've read, that, you know, you're relentless. Or people have said about you, relentless.
Yes.
And I guess, for me, that feels that's probably quite close to being unreasonable quite a lot of the time, or are they maybe they're different things?
I think it depends what it is. I mean, I think there's a time to lead and a time to follow. And when the time to lead, you know, comes, then you have to be. I mean, I'm relatively unforgiving. That doesn't always make me the easiest person to work with, you know, but I work in a great team who will often tell me to stop. And sometimes I need that, you know. It's... But we're trying to do some big things. I mean, this isn't a job for me, it's a vacation. I mean, I'd have moved on a long time ago. I could have moved on for lots of money or a whole range of things, but I committed to stay and do it. And that means that you have to sacrifice lots of things, including family and a whole range of things. And when you're doing that, then you have to be unreasonable.
Okay. Anybody got a burning question they want to ask, or I'll keep on asking them, but over there, yes.
Hi, I hope you'll forgive me because I've never worked in advertising at all, so I hope this isn't a naive question. I've always been a journalist and lately a coach, a performance coach, but one thing did interest me, and that is the subject of personal branding. John Hegarty talked about the branding of a company or a bigger organisation, but what I'm really interested in, this is probably a selfish question, but what is the importance of personal branding? I know that Canon Fraser touched upon this slightly, but what's the importance of it, and what's the best way, what's the critical factor in achieving the right kind of personal branding?
First of all, I would say that, you know, sometimes I had to give a talk at a big symposium in Bordeaux to wine people. And when you use the word brand to these people, it is like Diablo has just walked into the room and, you know, screamed at them. So I realized that I should not use the word brand, despite the fact that I explained how a brand occurred, the history of a brand, why we have brands, which I won't go into now, of course. But so what I did is I said, well, I'm not going to use the word brand anymore. I'm going to use the word reputation. So if you transfer the word brand to reputation, then you have to say, you as an individual, what kind of reputation do you want? I thought it was very interesting in Michael talking about how, you know, a politician was treated, their reputation was treated. In a way, they were being treated like a brand. Oh, that's what you do, that's what you are. And they enforced it. But I think as an individual, I would not like to sort of think, you know, I don't want you to sort of say, I'm now a brand and I've got to do all those things. I think that'd be horrible. I think, but your reputation is the way of thinking about a brand. What do you want people to say about you? What do you want people to believe about you? And sometimes when you're talking to certain companies, change the word brand to reputation and you'll find you get a much more positive response. But for some reason, people are in fear of brands and they think it's a sort of horrible world we all live in.
And Giles, do you think, because you've got the loose cannon column, which I enjoy very much, but you know that feels like brand?
No, the real brand is the clerical collar. I mean, it's the most branded thing you could possibly have in your life. And you can really tell people react to you in entirely different ways. I don't wear them. I absolutely loathe them, and I loathe the way in which it changes people's reaction to them. So, if you're in Italy, pregnant women stand up for you on the bus, and if you're in Ireland, people spit at you or whatever. I mean, it's just it's an extraordinary thing. And one of the things that the brand is so strong. I mean, it's such it effaces your personality, and it makes everybody has so many assumptions about you. And I hate it when people use reverend and all those sorts of things. Those are appropriate titles, because actually they end up obscuring the directness of communication. So when you talked about speaking the truth, coming out of who you are, and all of that sort of stuff, one of the things that I find is if the brand, as it were, is so powerful and so strong, and like Michael, everybody sees you through the narrow weir of this particular sort of expectation or assumption, then it becomes very debilitating, very debilitating. And I think certainly for the church, the branding is so very strong that actually that needs to be broken and recast.
But Giles and I think probably are in quite similar terrain, because we're both freelancers. And so, we may never be paid a single penny after today, unless someone books us to come and speak, unless someone asks us to go and do Thought for the Day, or the Moral Maze, or to make another television series. So for freelancers, I mean, let's face it, brand is all important. The BBC, ITV, a conference organizer, they need to know more or less what they're getting. There has to be stuff about reliability or provocation or whatever it is they're looking for when they book you. So whatever Giles may say, I mean, I assume that Giles is as brand dependent as I am.
No, that's true. It's just you have an ambivalent relationship to the brand, don't you? This is what we're saying. I mean, it's both opportunity and constraint, and you have to negotiate those things very carefully.
Just picking up on that, Michael, do you think you were judged by people's perceptions of the Tory brand, or Thatcher's Conservative brand, and therefore that was that set you, cast you in a particular light, whereas now you're your own brand?
Oh yes, that is true. I'm now my own brand, whereas I was part of that. That's true, but I mean, I regard the Thatcher brand as a pretty positive brand, actually. I have not disowned my past, and indeed, been reading me in the last few days. A bit of it has even appeared in the, a bit of me has risen from the grave.
I obviously thought you were just doing that. I thought you were doing that for publicity for this. I assumed that was. Which I thought it was very clever, and we're very grateful.
Actually, for me, the nearest I can come to the truth about this about myself is that I felt such stress in politics. I enjoyed it enormously. I thought it was an incredible privilege and a wonderful broad canvas on which to paint. I absolutely loved it. But I also suffered from extraordinary levels of stress. And what I do now is entirely stress-free. And that's why I referred to, going back to my friends and asking them. I think, has this always been me? Yes. But sometimes it was with extraordinary levels of stress. Stress plus enjoyment equals okay. Stress with no enjoyment equals find another job.
Another question from the audience, please. At the back there. Could you shout, please?
Yeah, I was just interested. I mean, you've obviously all achieved, amazing things, whether you've had a team with you or, sort of on your own. But how important do you feel when you're going into a situation where the odds are stacked up against you, that you sort of have a private mentor, and I think about a private mentor as an individual, but someone that you can actually turn to when, let's face it, no matter how confident you are, sometimes the odds really do feel stacked against you. And a mentor that maybe the public or the opposition, so to speak, don't know about. And how is that factored into each of these situations?
Who would like to go first on that? Karyn, what about mentor?
I have somebody who's actually is a man, a very senior male, which is quite important to me because I'm quite unusual in the police. I'm female, and I run quite a big agenda. And he tells me to dry my eyes. I mean, that's pretty much what he says, is, look, you took this on. You knew what you were letting yourself in for, and to dry your eyes and get on with this. And sometimes I just need that. It's just a bit, just occasionally, when climbing doesn't do it for me. And it's absolutely integral. I mean, I couldn't do without him. I mean, it just sometimes I never speak to him for months. Sometimes I speak to him all the time. And it's just about that, you know, occasional self-doubt. Am I big, you know, just personal self-doubt. Can I really do this, you know? Can I take on some of these enormous challenges? I mean, I've had quite difficult fights with government at sometimes, and with some of the, you know, I came out against mandatory sentencing. And that was very difficult because I had lots of victims' families, you know, who really took it very personally. And, you know, so I think mentoring is incredibly important, regardless of what position you're in.
That's what we need. I think we need, all of us need somebody to tell us to dry our eyes.
Yeah.
I think, for
It's
me,
a very
that's...
Scottish slang.
Yeah.
Oh, I blub.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm the opposite to that. I need someone to give me the tissues and just, like, sit there when the taps turn on. And my psychotherapist does that. And she calls me a crybaby. In fact, we did sorry, I can tell this rather embarrassing story, is that 6 months ago or something, there was a Stonewall Awards, and I got voted Stonewall Hero of the Year, which I was very pleased about. And Jeanette Winterson was voted the Stonewall Author of the Year. And it so happens that her partner is my psychotherapist, Susie Orbach. So we both went up for our photograph together, Jeanette and I, and suddenly looked over at the side, and there was my wife and my psychotherapist standing next to each other. And the picture of me has this utter grimace of hell and fear as I see the two of them sitting talking to each other. But the point is, just as I had to make my speech, I had a little tear, and my analyst, who I'm afraid I do see in public because of these sorts of occasions, she goes, "You're always a crybaby." It's the only time she said it, not in the therapy, she said it in bloody public.
I think the other thing I would say to that is I think as you become more successful, it becomes harder to find those people that you can truly trust and go to. And it's that whole thing about, you know, your success breeds your failure. And I mean, I call it the McCartney syndrome because, you know, Paul McCartney split from John Lennon and then went on and wrote the Frog Song and the Mull of Kintyre. And, you know, I'm sure if he'd had Lennon around him, he'd have said, "Hey, Paul, don't do the Frog Song," you know. But he did, and he didn't. What he was surrounded by was a whole group of people who said, "Paul, you're a genius. You can write anything. Off you go." So I think it's certainly on my side, it is fundamentally important to have somebody that you can genuinely trust, who will say to you, "John, that is a heap of shit," you know, and they aren't worried that they're saying it to the bloke whose name is on the door. That's crucial. So always have somebody that you can turn to.
Michael?
Yeah. My wife and my family, I don't have any children, but I have brothers and a mother and so on. That's all been very, very solid and important, although I would never dream of discussing my career with my wife or with my brothers. It's just one of those relationships where it doesn't get discussed in that way. I would like to make, it's not quite a contrary point, but I'd just like to make a slightly different point. One of the things that I found really liberating about my second career is that whereas my first career was entirely predictable in that I was moving up a greasy pole in politics, and I was inside an organisation, a complicated organisation, party organisation, governmental organisation, lots and lots of tiers, T-I-E-R-S, I mean. I now live in a situation where I'm wholly self-employed. I don't work for anybody, and nobody works for me. I don't have a secretary or anything. And I have found that so liberating, not to be in a hierarchy, not to be in an organisation, to be completely freewheeling, not to have to think about what I have to... But when I came here today, Giles said, "Oh, you must be in trouble for what you've said about Europe." He imagined that I was still in an organisation, the Conservative Party. I am not. No one can say anything to me. No one can tell me off. And also, I don't have to think about people working for me and my responsibilities to them. So you may think this is rather selfish, but I have found it completely liberating. So all my relationships with the people, of course I still have to work with people, I couldn't do anything on my own, but all my relationships are newly formed and freelance, and the emphasis perhaps is on the free. It's an entirely free association between me and the people who come together, for example, to make programs. And I found this a rather lovely model. Of course, I've worked with many people again and again, but each time it's free, and I love it.